What a treat today, Jennifer, to have Ronnie on the show. Bill, I've been looking forward to this one.
Yeah, I know. I have been too. It's just the perspective that comes with experience at the levels of leadership that Ronnie has had. It's irreplaceable. This is exciting.
He's both somebody who has led through so many incredible companies. He talks about Seagate and Motorola, Jabil and Plexus. Mm-hmm. But he's also, I think, really taken time to share his ideas. You can tell that they're metabolized more. So they're, some people are just presenters and some people are just doers. And Ronnie is able to explain like what he does and why.
and to do it in a way that is very relatable and it maybe deceivingly attainable. It's really inspiring. I think it's
naturally quotable too, right? Like
yes.
Like things come out as like Pascal once said, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time,
That's exactly right.
And we, there's so much in this episode. We could have gone on forever and it's packed with just nuggets of incredible wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just comes through. It just naturally comes through. Like I said, the capability and the confidence is so humbly on display and yet so inspiring. Listeners are going to love this one.
And not to don't fast forward to the end, but just the breadth that he's spanned in his career, from early days and individual lines and single piece flow into global leadership and the lessons that he has. There aren't that many people that have that level of experience. So
for sure,
people are going to enjoy this one.
For sure. Don't skip to the end, but don't skip the end.
Absolutely. All right, let's not hold people back. Let's get into it.
Absolutely. Okay, let's do it.
We're excited to welcome Ronnie Darroch to the podcast today. Ronnie is a seasoned manufacturing executive with nearly 4 decades of experience driving global operations, technology strategy, and transformation across the electronics manufacturing space. Most recently, he served as EVP and Chief Technology Officer at Plexus, where he helped lead enterprise-wide innovation and digital enablement. His career also includes leadership roles at Jabil, 17 years, Seagate, Motorola, Avex Electronics, giving him a unique vantage point on how manufacturing has evolved from the ground up. In today's conversation, we explore what it takes to lead through transformation, from building high-performance teams and scaling AI responsibly to balancing strategy with execution. We'll also dig into why customer empathy and deep thinking are more essential than ever in the age of automation. Ronnie, thanks so much for joining the show.
Well, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Fantastic. I want to start with your leadership journey and back to kind of the early days of your career. It's been phenomenal. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new and multiple things new. I think you were at Jabil like 17 years, and now you've just capped off an amazing journey at Plexus, maybe 11 or 12 years.
Yeah, it was 12 years at Plexus, but I worked 10 years before I joined Jabil, right? Started in 1985 at a company called Apollo Computers. And Apollo used to build workstations for people like Mentor Graphics, eventually acquired by HP. And I studied electrical and electronic engineering, graduated in 85, and then straight to work. Right. And Scotland at that time had lots of jobs. Right? It was called Silicon Glen. I don't know if you know that.
I know.
There was after the Valley, right? And there was everybody was here: HP, DEC, IBM, Compaq, just Seagate Microelectronics, Motorola. It was just, really a huge investment in the electronic space. So that's.
How did you even pick that first job where there were so many choices?
So I got 2 job offers the first week. Right, one was a company called SCI. Which was in Irvine, and the other one was Apollo. And the Apollo was a little bit less in terms of salary, but I thought it would be more interesting. I mean, it was building workstations to order, testing them, configuring them. So, and during that, debugging them, learned how to program. Really good fun, right? First job out of school. But I didn't stay there very long. I think I was one of the first folks to leave. There was a company called Seagate Technology.
Just real quick, you picked straight out of school, you had the wisdom to take the one with less comp, but it was more interesting.
Yeah, it was more interesting. I mean, it was only £300, right? I think my first salary was £6,700 a year, and the other one was 7K, right? So I had a little bit further to drive. It was good. And I remember when I resigned and left, and they were like, "You're one of the first people to ever leave." So, but there was a company came up, a job role at East Kilbride, and that was fixing disk drives, printed circuit boards to component level. And I thought, hey, that's, and if you think back to 1985, right? So if you get a chance, have a look at an image of an ST506 hard drive, and you'll see you've got this size of drive, right? The disk drive had 2 disks, a spindle motor, stepper motor, an E-block, which is 4 heads for read writing, and a printed circuit board that controlled it. But a 500 watt inch disk was a big deal, and 10 meg storage was a big deal at the time. You think, looking back, like just you think about Moore's law, and you think about the
incredible,
the advances in disk drives, and it's just it was amazing. So I remember I was asked to fix, maybe could you fix about 30 bolts a day?
That stuff is mind blowing. I go here in Silicon Valley to the Computer History Museum, and the disk with just like the shape of it, and then down to the storing electrons and transistors. Incredible. Okay, so but you were working on these like double disk drive devices.
Yeah, just fixing PCBs to component level, and then one day, maybe not even a year into the job, the managing director came and said, "Hey, would you run this department, the both test and repair?" A guy called Mike Watt. I said, "Sure." So that was an interesting role. I was still hands-on fixing printed circuit boards, but it used to be that the technicians would diagnose the board, they would pass them to the repairers, they would repair them, then they would give them to the testers, and they would test them. I thought, well, let's try and change that process flow. All right, so I set up cells, so you would debug the board, you would pass it directly to a repair operator opposite you. They had a known good hard drive. So they would, as soon as they had finished the repair, they would put on the known good drive, and they would tell you, yeah, you got that one right, or, try again, you couldn't fix it. So it was interesting, that the kind of one-piece flow and immediate, instant feedback, that just kind of came naturally. I thought that was the most logical thing to do versus, debug them all in a batch and pass them to the repair people, and then eventually you might get feedback or you might not. So that was the role. But one of the kind of lessons, I think, for me was at some point in your career, someone has to give you a chance to lead. They have to see something in you. All right. So maybe for the folks that are listening, when you go to the Gemba, the place where work takes place, are you open? Are you looking for talent, drive? What is it? Because, who knows where my career would have gone without someone giving you that first opportunity. And experiences early in your career, I think, are really important. So that was something that I always thought about. But, the guy's name was Mike Walker, really good guy.
You remember his name?
Yeah, we're still in contact.
Yeah.
I remember one day he came to me, and I'd gone from running the bulk test department to, hey, would you like to run the whole factory at night shift, including the clean room? And this was a repair centre for Europe. And then would you like to run production at day shift? So I just kept on I was getting these opportunities to move to different job roles really quite early in my career. But the one that came out of left field was, hey, tomorrow you're production manager, you're distribution manager. It's like, and it'd all be test and debug and production. I don't know anything about distribution. Receiving, shipping, traffic, customs, excise, inventory control. He says, I know, but you'll figure it out. Fine. You won't see me in any of your meetings for the next 2 weeks. He said, I'll be on the floor with the folks. And that's what I did. I went and spent time and trying to understand. I can't help people unless I understand what they do. And then when I understand and take time to actually do the job, what systems do you use? How does the material come in? How do you know what success looks like? What does the material go after? What transactions do you play on the system? How many days backlog? And it used to drive me crazy because it was a repair centre and you had contractual turnaround times, and I could never tell walking around the warehouse how many days backlog there were. So I said, right guys, we're going to put in a colour-coded system. I put A4 envelopes on a pallet. So I knew that when I walked around the warehouse, if I had 3 colours, I had 3 days backlog. So we did a colour for every day of the week. And again, that was a kind of lesson on visual management, right? And the importance of it and making it really easy for people to see.
Before, when you talked about how you changed from batch to single piece flow and it was just intuitive for you. And here you're talking about this like coloring system. Like, did somebody tell you that? Was it intuitive? Did you, where does that come from?
Well, it just made sense that it solved a couple of problems because they would go to receive a pallet and then the paperwork had got lost. All right, so you're like trying to scramble and figure out right, what customer sent these drives back. Are they 7-day turnaround? Is it, are they DOA? They need 24-hour turnaround. It drives me crazy, right? So that's like, right, we're going to use colour codes. We're going to put the paper in the A4 envelope that would stick to the first pallet, and then that would tie the shipment together. So it solved a couple of problems. And folks bought it, but we would bring drives from Singapore for repair, and they would book it into the receiving system, and then they would book it in the Singapore system to keep the ins and outs for Singapore correct. And I was like, well, why don't we just update the 2 databases with one transaction? And sometimes the absence of knowledge is a really good thing, right? Because you can ask the questions that people have just stopped asking because they've always done it a certain way. So that was probably another lesson for me. It's okay to ask the questions, right? And say, hey, what about this and why do we do that? But I had to spend a few weeks with the team on that process, actually doing the job, right? Because I would just sit down and I would receive the drives and say, right, okay, where do they go next? Right, let's walk through that process. And I think that's important, and it stood me in good stead, throughout my career, is having the willingness to kind of roll up your sleeves and figure out where value's been added, how does it really happen and how can I act it?
So Ronnie, I want to stop on this point for just a second. I remember when you said, somebody at some point in your career must give you the opportunity to lead. And I think that, those of us that have had a career for a minute all remember that first time somebody approached you and gave you the opportunity to lead a team. I think everybody that's had that remembers that moment.
Yeah.
I love that you shared that. And I love that your response was, right, I'm not going to be in any meetings for a couple of weeks. I'm going to be on the floor. I'm going to be seeing what I need to see to do this. I love that because that's exactly the experience many of us have had. I want to talk to you, tell us a little bit more. What are some of those key turning points beyond that shaped your career? And I think importantly, how did it shape your approach to innovation, culture, leadership style?
Yeah, and I don't think that the time you're doing it, right? So I'll give you a few more examples. Maybe it's a couple more at Seagate. So I remember we were moving from a Lotus 1-2-3 system, right? If you guys, you're probably too young.
Yeah, Lotus, all right.
Yep.
Right, and then to an ERP system which was ASK Man in the 80s. Right? This would have been about 87. Right? I was distribution manager, and I had explained to my boss that we were going to put in the system. It was a new 9-digit part number system. I was going to cycle count all the inventory locations. I was really confident that receipts and shipments were tight, but I wasn't, to be honest, confident about the bucket integrity, right? The logical and physical for like off-site storage locations. So I had explained, at least I thought I had, that this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to transact everything into a variance account, but don't look at the account until we've completed the whole entire physical inventory. So someone in the States looked at the account well, we're midway through, and I think I had a minus $1 million variance in the account. And I got a phone call on Saturday to say, why should you not be fired? I was like, well, I explained, at least I thought what I was doing, right? I said, look, you just need to give me the time to do the count, and then we can talk about the results when it's finished. So we had $9.2 million of inventory across the plant, the off-site location, and we ended up with a $3,400 variance. on inventory and we were best in the world at that. But just shows you that, I mean, I thought I'd explained what we were doing, why we were doing it. Maybe I didn't check understanding enough, but someone at the other side of the world looked at the account and thought, what the hell? Right. So, but that was an interesting moment. There's probably another one at Seagate in 1991. Folks, execs from the States flew across to tell us that we're closing the plant. Right, so you go to work in the morning, they said, I've been there 6 years, you get 1 week for every year. You could keep your company car for 3 months and we'd like you to leave by lunchtime. So you look at me like, wow, I'm at the job this morning and I don't have a job this afternoon. It was, and I remember thinking, if I ever have to do a major plant closure or downsizing, restructuring, reduction in force, whatever you want to call it, that's how I won't do it.
Yeah.
And that was a kind of a lesson that stuck with me, and I'll maybe cover that a little bit later in one of the experiences at Jabil that I had to go through. But that actually quite hard, right?
Yeah.
And you definitely take that kind of a knock. You think, wow. So that would have been about July of 91, and then there was a company across the road hiring called AVEX Electronics. AVEX was part of the GM Humor Corporation at the time. Much bigger than Jabil was at that time, actually, believe it or not, 1981. And I joined as a production manager in October of 91. And they had 5 plants within about a 1 mile radius. And I had the original plant. So good fun. Went from production manager about 3-4 months out of the job. The guy that ran the 5 plants, he'd taken to be the plant manager of this, whole thing, own the whole factory. I was probably 27, I think, kind of type. I never thought anything of it. I didn't even ask him for any more money, believe it or not, right? So, hey, why don't you go for production manager, plant manager? But sure.
Your money theme again. Not chasing the money, chasing the experience. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting, and that was an interesting job. And there was the guy that changed, and I had a plan, and I was building mainly the molds for IBM at the time. And I remember going on vacation and coming back, and the guy that ran the 5 plants said, just to let you know, this new product for IBM, I've brought another team in to run this line. He's like, so we'll come back from vacation. So it doesn't affect, it doesn't affect your call, it doesn't affect anything, just probably you're kind of trying, you're thinking, right, what's going on? So I let it go for a couple of weeks, and it wasn't working, and I was getting the customer calling me because I had a good relationship with the customer. And so I ended up going in and saying, look, tell you what, put the guys on the consolidation, because we were trying to take the 5 plants and consolidate them onto one large plant, just from an overhead perspective. And I said, I'll take the plant back. Here's what we'll deliver between now and Christmas. And this would have been about October. I said, and see if it doesn't work, you can fire me at Christmas. So he was like, so we did exactly what we said we were going to do. And then just before Christmas, I resigned and went to work for Motorola and said, go knock yourself out. Don't ever do that again. And I said, that's not how you treat people. So that was another lesson that stuck with me, just about there are appropriate ways to treat people. Right? And for me, you'll have heard me say that I don't care what you're doing, you're really in the people business first and foremost.
Yeah, in the people business. Ronnie, you're reminding me of a quote, as you talked about that story, becoming plant manager at 27, and then how you did this hustle to the end of Christmas and then quit because you put in the effort because you're that kind of person, but then you were like, that's not how you treat people. I'm reminded by another time we had this conversation. You said this thing that stuck with me, and it was something like, what will ultimately differentiate the performance of your whole company is the discretionary effort of your team. I remember you said that, the discretionary effort of your team. And then you said, therefore, leadership is putting in place the conditions to inspire that discretionary effort.
And I remember that pretty well. Yeah.
That stuck with me. And I maybe talk about that a bit, because it sounds like here you were willing to do it, maybe because of who you were, but then you were like, that's not the way to treat people, you quit. And then later you said, how do I continuously create conditions to get people?
Yeah. So I think for me, I had a responsibility in a relationship with the customer and to the people that work for me, right? So I've worked for some really good people and I've worked for some not so good people over the years, right? And they'll remain nameless. But, I think it was my own kind of personal desire to ensure we did what we said we were going to do for the customer. Because business is really about customers and the folks that work for you, right? And taking care of them. And they had placed their trust in us by awarding us the business. And it was incumbent upon us to deliver. So I was able to separate my own feelings, but I decided to vote with my feet and go work for Motorola, actually, in the European cellular subscriber division, and that was really, I said, look, he did it at midnight. He asked me really not to go, and I said, once you pulled that card and said, hey, you don't run this part of the plan, and that was probably the biggest part and the most important project.
Yeah.
It was interesting. It was a monitor card that went through Surface Mount, Auto and Zeta, had about 110 people on the line. There was 100 plus manual insertion components, 45 second at that time. So it was an important and difficult part to build at the time.
How do you do that differently, though? Because that manager used, which I think a lot of managers do, they use something external. It's like the customer's forcing us, we have this deadline. But then you as a team member, you feel like, it's my leader's not really in control. They're just like, so it's like my allegiance is to the customer relationship. But how have you sought to do that differently, where you lead and you inspire that discretionary effort, like based on the group of people versus just some external deadline that
So I think if you talk about teams, trust is the foundation of all relationships, right? So whether that's personal or professional. So I think if you think about that, anytime I get a team, I want to get to know the folks individually, because you recruit, whether that's an internal person or you're taking over a team, you get the whole person, not just the work person. I put a post up on LinkedIn yesterday, I don't know if you saw it, about, my wife's kind of cancer journey, right? 800 days from, finding the lump to the publishing of a novel. And I was working at Plexus and well supported, but it's really important that people recognise that everybody's got stuff going on in their life.
Absolutely.
Being really authentic in building relationships. Who was it that said? Theodore Roosevelt, I think, he said, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. Maybe that quote's attributed to Roosevelt, right? And I think he's absolutely spot on, right? So I think investing the time in the relationships, and then pulling the team together about, okay, what is our mission and vision? What are we going to accomplish as a team? How are we going to hold ourselves accountable? Right? I generally only hire low maintenance people. I give people lots of freedom, and I make sure that they understand that my job is to help them be successful. Right? I'm here to help you be successful. I don't know all the answers. Right? I know some of the questions through experience, and I think if you approach it that way, then you could get the best out of folks and get them focused on what you're trying to accomplish. I've had folks that work for me and I've moved from company to company. So I've been lucky enough to be able to do that.
I want to build on that a little bit. I think that you've highlighted something that can't be overstated here, how important it is to build a culture of trust, and that's how you'll get your people to stay longer, for one, to produce better, to do better for the customer. I want to externalize this a little bit and talk about the customer aspect of it. You talked about, making sure that there's that focus on your teams. How do you build that? You've said before, people do business with people that they trust. And that's true. If I've had a long-standing relationship with somebody in business, it's pretty easy to maintain it as long as I keep up that level of trust. How do you start it from scratch with a new customer? You've led, I would say, of course, we would say, trust but verify. We're a data company, right? So of course it's, is it that you leaned heavily on the technology to build trust with your customers, or is it that you leaned heavily in other areas to build trust with your customers, or what was that blend? Talk me through that a little bit.
Let's think of it. A customer has a choice. Mm-hmm. They always have a choice, right? They choose company A or company B. Mm-hmm. The person at the customer who makes that award decision, they might be betting their career on the fact that they chose you versus one of your competitors. Might even be betting their job, depending on the culture in that company. So for me, we must never take that lightly. Mm-hmm. And every interaction with a customer is an opportunity to delight or disappoint. You just think about it. You go to a nice restaurant, right? You have a nice meal. What do? You tell a few friends, right? Hey, great. Nice night, good service, good value for money, great food. Really enjoyed it. What happens if it was a bad experience? How many people would you tell?
A lot more.
You generally tell a lot more, right? Mm. And our industry is really, really small. People know people that know people. And so not taking that lightly and then creating that culture. And it's not just the quality of the product that you deliver or did they deliver it on time and full? Did you send the quote when you said? Did you send the email back when you said you were going to do it? If they asked you to size an upside or a downside, right, did you go back on time? So there are so many touch points on a daily basis through an organisation where you can choose to delight or disappoint. But the key thing is making people aware of that, trying to make it like using the restaurant analogy to say, right, I get it. Right? Because it's got to be real for people at all different levels of the organisation, from the shop floor, working on the product all the way through the enterprise. So I think consistently deliver what you promise, but it's trust. I think if something's not working, my approach is to problem solve together with the customer and say, look, this is not working for us, and here's why. So let's talk about how we can solve it together versus pulling out of the contract and say, this upside was within the 30-day window. And at the end of the day, they've got a customer who wants product. Can we help them? You only exist to solve problems for customers.
It's a reminder that the human experience is important in business. Yeah.
For me, it's hugely important, Ronnie. Yeah. That if you can build those trusting relationships, executive level, I think it also gives you maybe an opportunity, and if your culture is focused on, engaging your people, inspiring them to take care of your customers, do you want an unfair share of their business? You have to be competitive, right? The market, the industry, margin structure, they're not going to change. Yeah. The US industries is a tough business, right? With, sub 10% gross margin, or maybe 10 and a little bit. But it's a tough business.
Yeah.
It needs a lot of working capital, it needs a lot of plant property and equipment, it's but I remember the difference when I was asked to go to Jabil from Motorola, right? And my boss, Seagate, happened to be the person who was starting up Jabil in Scotland, right? And then my boss, Motorola, was the guy that I thought we were expected at Apex. So was, when I'm going through a job change, the first thing I look at is, what's the person I'm going to work for like? That relationship is really important to me. What's the opportunity for growth and development? What's the culture today in the current company versus perceived, and job satisfaction, the opportunity to make a difference. That tends to be something that I want to go with. Wherever I want to go to, did you need it better? You found it.
So, Ronnie, how have you thought about leadership in the age now of digital transformation? And I don't want to get too far ahead, but when we think about AI, we've been talking about trust, and like AI kind of has a trust problem, right? It's like, it's absolutely incredible. It can act like a human, make decisions like a human, but can I trust it to do it right? And I feel like that's not altogether new, even in the prior digital transformations. Can I trust the data? Can I trust these things? So how did you think about, and maybe this was, I know in Plexus and maybe in Jabil as well, as you were increasingly leading digital transformation leaderships, like how did that play out for you? And
Yeah, so I mean, I think AI will change many industries, right, over the next few years. That we won't recognize them, but technology's always changed. Industrial revolution. So I think making sure that we're using the technology to solve real problems. What was it? The economist Paul Krugman said, productivity is not everything, but in the end, it's almost everything. American economist, right? So making sure that we're using it productively to drive improvement. Can we really use AI to create a better world for people and planet? If you get to a real macro level, I think there's, a really good book that I think I told you about the last time, The Atomic Human.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that as not so light reading, but it's one of the professors at Cambridge on our CTO course. So really worthwhile book, but it does suggest that there needs to be some level of governance around, because at the end of the day, if it's just an AI model, where's the accountability? Would you want to making really big decisions for you or for your country? But would you want it to help productivity? And maybe it's in a healthcare setting where it can do much more faster. But I think really ensuring that we are thoughtful about it, how we deploy it, and then I think your company gives us a great opportunity to connect processes end to end and be much more intelligent versus scrambling for data, right? And I think that's great. But I still then need to ensure I've got the culture of continuous improvement to act on the insights. And that's harder.
Yeah.
Connecting and getting the data is the easy part for me. The culture of continuous improvement, and if you have to do that in a line, and then a factory, and then a region, and then a globe, and making sure that everybody understands, we want to be the best in the world. Here's why we're using this, and here's the benefit we're going to get as a result of it. And we're focused on productivity. For me, that's
hard.
That's critical, man.
Yep. Yep. Andrew's heard me say this many, many times. As hard as technology is, it's the easy part. So
it's explicit, prescriptive. You know what you're doing. People are much more analog, right? You've got to figure out, how am I going to switch this person on, right? And how am I going to get them engaged? It's just different, right? And it's so you have to invest the time up front with folks. I think if you're going to be successful. And I think that is, if there was a lesson in global collaboration, it's that.
There's smart manufacturing is about more than just technology, for sure. So, and I actually, let's talk about that for just a second. It's been a hype word for a while, smart manufacturing. I think it means something very different today than it did, 30, 40 years ago. So talk to me a little bit about, what does it mean right now? Where do you see manufacturers placing good bets and getting it right? Where are you seeing some places where we're not moving quickly enough or just not prioritizing enough?
Yeah, I think I'd reiterate, right? The data is the currency of the future for me, right? Absolutely, unquestionably. Getting the data is the easy part, right? but your culture and your management process to drive improvement is where you get the value. What was it Socrates said in 400 BC? All knowledge is meaningless unless applied. So the cultural aspect of what you're trying to change, if I was giving you an 80-20 rule, I would spend 80% of my time on that and 20% on the connectivity that goes from, end to end. And if you spend that time up front and engage people and involve them, right? If you don't involve people, no involvement equals no commitment. Right, and this has been done to me, and is it a threat? Am I going to have a job? And I go back into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and, so I get passive aggressive behaviour, and or even worse, resistance. So I think it's here to stay. We need to embrace it, but we need to make sure that we're thoughtful about the cultural impact and bringing people with us on the journey.
That's so true. It feels like it's never been more true in AI, because when you had a pure automation, you bring in a conveyor and an arm, you can kind of just switch it into the station, ignore it. It's going to do its job. With AI, it's both the most powerful to engage with ever, and the most, if you don't engage, it creates like zero value, absolutely zero. And so you just like have to get that adoption engagement right to make it make sense. I wanted to ask you, Ronnie, about like kind of speaking about, you mentioned earlier, like holding people accountable, giving them ownership, and holding like your technology, like governance around it. You mentioned the book, right? Governance and accountability of AI. So you have to measure, like, are we actually being successful? And I want to read one of your quotes that I wrote down from earlier. You said there should be a Hippocratic oath when it comes to metrics management, with the first rule being do no harm. And so, I wanted to ask you, like, what should manufacturers rethink about how they're tracking and using data and AI in this age to do no harm and to properly hold technology accountable?
Yeah, so I think making sure metrics are aligned, or you consciously have them opposing. For example, I used to have a metric that looked at win rate, customer win rate, but also I can win all the business in the world if I don't make any money. So I had to then say, okay, the win rate has to be X, but the margin has to be Y. And I need the two together when it comes to check and balance. So alignment and check and balance and being thoughtful about metrics. I mean, metrics, I'm reminded of a funny story right now. I was at Jabil in the mid-90s, right? And this kind of maybe illustrates just alignment around metrics, but the production line was struggling a lot for downtime, material downtime, especially the morning, right? And it wasn't running 3 shifts, so it was kind of strange. People would come in and we scrambled for material. So after much, investigation, I discovered that cycle count was being done on night shift by the warehouse team. And if they found a variance between the physical, what they had on hand in the stockroom, and the logical on the system, they would go take the material off the production line. You think, wow, right? Can that possibly be true? But absolutely was true. And then the people in the hall would come out thinking, right, this is a disaster. Right, we can't. But the stockroom folks were bonused on cycle count accuracy, nothing to do with what the production people were doing, what the customer was seeing. So it's an unintended consequence of metrics in the system of management. Your metrics, what's the key question when it comes to metrics? I'm going to ask you this. What's the key question that you want to be asking yourself when it comes to your system of metrics management? And I'll give you my answer.
What's the key question I want to answer?
Exactly. Yeah. It seems so simple, but it also seems very simple to lose sight of it. So
I liked your check and balances. I want a North Star metric that truly means progress, and then like a quality metric or something to make sure not making progress at the wrong cost.
I mean, the key thing for me is your metrics management system making you more competitive as an enterprise? Is it making, can you service customers better, cheaper, faster? Is it engaging your people more? Is it that system, or is it you measure the metrics because you've always measured them that way?
Yeah.
And taking time to think through, what's appropriate, what are the unintended consequences, how does this whole thing hang together? There was a paper in the 1980s written by Peters, Waterman and Phillips, I think, Structure is Not Organisation. It looks at the McKinsey 7S model, if you've come across that.
Yeah.
But that's really looking at organisational and ensuring the things kind of stack up. But I think you could spend a lot of time, but for me, as I reflect on metrics, whatever it is it making you more competitive as an organisation? And if it's not, and you don't objective evidence that it is, then maybe it's time for a rethink. Take a step back and say, because if you're not improving on a daily basis, then you're standing still or progressing. Right? So
that's a good barometer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Listening to you talk about measurement and how important that is, I want to talk about that in kind of in the frame of scaling innovation globally. And is that important? Is that your primary focus? You've led teams across multiple regions and cultures through your career. Talk to us a little bit about what are some of the biggest challenges in scaling innovation. Of course, in the age of AI, we'll see whether that tracks with the same lessons or not. But, what are some of the lessons you've learned that help leaders foster global collaboration? So
the first thing I would say is global collaboration is hard. Anybody that tells you anything different has probably never done it, right? In my experience, and maybe it's just I wasn't a very good one, but yeah. So think about the challenges, right? You'd get geography and time zone.
Yeah.
That's one, right? Especially if you're trying to get through regions. You've got knowledge, both functional, explicit, tacit knowledge, and then you've got social and cultural differences. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to unpack just in that. So I think anybody that wants to do anything globally has got to be faced with those challenges. So understanding that up front and thinking, right, how could I give myself the best chance of success when it comes to folks working together? So I'll give you a few things. One, having a global sponsor, an exec sponsor, and ideally someone who has worked cross-functional and cross-regional, so has a bit of knowledge. I mean, I was lucky enough to work in Asia, Mexico, and Western, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, US. Invest in a face-to-face kickoff meeting. Whatever it is you're trying to solve, don't scrimp on it at the kickoff, because that is a key time to build relationships and build trust. So that is critical that you do that. Now, once you've established a rhythm and a cadence, right, you can move to Zoom, Teams, or whatever it is your platform of choices. But at the outset, I would suggest that you invest the time and have people go travel. And I would typically travel to the region that I thought would be the most challenging when it came to adoption. All right, so that wasn't left to kind of chance. I think you need to be clear on what the goals are. E.g., hey, we're going to reduce inventory by $1 million in the next 6 months. And here's what we're going to. Here's how we're going to use technology to go do it. Be curious when it comes to the team. Seek first to understand what people do before you're prescriptive. Leverage diversity. Can you make 1 and 1 equal 3 when it comes to the team? And the thing I've found useful is see if you can get them out the plant and get some social time with them to build some relationships. Even maybe go and do a charity event, where you're going to go do something as a team that just creates a whole different sense of feeling. And I've seen us, in the past doing this with customers where they go and clean up a local beach or they go visit, a care home, and do some voluntary work. But making meaning outside of the workplace to create connections, I think is important. To share explicit knowledge, you can write it down, right? To share tacit knowledge, you have to spend one-on-one time with the people or group, a place where work gets done, if you want, and that could be the shop floor where you take people on a tour and say, tell me what you see. Ono used to call them like Tachi Ono from Toyota. It was like the Ono circles, right? He would observe. But I found that really useful, just taking time with folks on the floor and say, tell me what you see. Make sure you take the time to celebrate success at each milestone. Because in my experience, there's always another hill to take, another mountain to climb. And if you don't take some time to celebrate, then people can run out of energy, run out of steam, especially in a challenging project. Mm-hmm. And then make sure that you've got an appropriate governance cadence. And if you've got to do it in the morning and the folks in APAC are going to be there at night all the time, then apologise up front. But a better idea is to rotate it so that everybody, has to either be there late at night or early morning. But you try and be fair. But, it's not an all-encompassing list. But I think, in my experience, these things are important to create connections, to foster that global collaboration.
Right. I like that. Sometimes these projects can be taxing on our people. And anytime there's change, anytime there's innovation, there's stretching. And, best case scenario, it can be taxing on our people. I like that. I like that perspective of, bringing them along, giving them a seat at the table, giving them some ownership, giving them some, the support that they need is important.
Everybody talks about change management and they're like, until it affects them personally, I think.
Yeah, it's so true.
I thought you were the one that had to change something.
That is true.
And that's just human, we're wired, right? But if the more you think about that and think about people, the more you can have a laugh and say, right, what we're going to do together. We want to be the best I've always said the goal is you want to be the best in the world at what you do. But do you want to be second best? Or no? Why not strive to be the best?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. It's time for rapid fire questions. So, Ronnie, first one. Is there a book, movie, or TV series that inspires you when thinking about the future of manufacturing?
So maybe I'll give you a few. Right. So I think I really enjoyed Chris Miller's book, Chip War. Right, if you've read that, and given you a whole insight into how we ended up with the semiconductor supply chain that we ended up with today. So I think that is worthwhile read. I do like Professor Neil Lawrence's Atomic Human. Yeah. And I think that is really relevant for the questions that we're wrestling with today when it comes to AI. He uses the term machine intelligence. And he's not spent his whole career in academia. He was head of machinery at Amazon for a few years.
Okay.
Non-tech book, probably The Dive and the Bell and the Butterfly. John Dominique Bobby, which I don't know if you've come across. So that's a really interesting book. It's about a man who he was editor-in-chief at Elle magazine in Paris and had a massive stroke.
Yeah.
And the only thing that he could move was his left eyelid.
I've seen the movie, it's striking, yeah.
So he wrote the book, blinking.
Wrote his own.
And just these things, he died a couple of days after it was published, I think, but the resilience and the butterfly was like his thoughts, and the diving guy was a constrained body, and he was kind of, but the ingenuity and resilience to be able to do something like that is amazing to me.
Phenomenal. Okay, do you have a leader or innovator in technology or engineering that you admire or inspires you the most?
I think as I look back, probably Steve Jobs. one person. He rescued Apple from bankruptcy in 1997. And you think about the industries that he's transformed, from smartphones to tablets. And you remember how cool it was when you first got an iPod? Right? I think the predecessor was the Sony Walkman, right? And the technology was there, but that it just, and I think the way he thinks, it was always about, let's start with the customer experience and work back. It's not about the technology and how we force fit that in the customer experience. You have to start with the customer and how this is going to make their life better.
Yeah, like that perspective.
It's great.
Ronnie, what piece of technology outside of manufacturing has had the most impact on your life?
So probably cars. Right. I bought my first car in 1982, age 17, for £250. And then I bought a Haynes manual, which was a manual that you would use to repair it when you actually couldn't repair cars. Change engines and gearboxes and clutches and cylinder heads and grind valves. And I got to fix all my friends' cars for free, which wasn't the most sensible, but yeah, I've always liked cars. And now I put gas in and washer fluid and that's it, and drive them. So I think, I've lost count of how many cars I've had over the years, but a lot.
Takes me back a little bit, makes me remember mine. All right, if you could instantly acquire a new skill or knowledge in any area, what would it be?
Probably languages. I'm using kind of one of the apps, Sparkle or something, to teach myself Italian. But I think, one, because I like to learn, right? But I think I'm at the point now where to be disciplined enough, I'm going to engage a tutor. But I think it just gives you just a different cultural experience, right? When you can speak the language ideally fluently, but even if you've got some, we lived in France, we had some French, right? But that was 20 years ago, right? So you don't use it, you lose it. I spent some time learning Mandarin when I was supposed to go around China for Jabil. That was another story. So until you discover tunes and the same word, depending on how you pronounce it, 4 different meanings, I think. Wow. So yeah, languages for me, I think, are fun to learn.
That's a good one.
Love that. And last question to you, Ronnie. A lot of our viewership are young folks just getting into operations or maybe in the earlier part of their career. What advice would you give to these people who aspire to be in operations leadership in the future?
So I would say, I think I've said it before, really, remember business is about customers and it's about discretionary effort of people, first and foremost, and delivering a customer experience, better, faster, cheaper than your competitors. So I think with all the technology in the world, it's still about customers, and take your time to really understand what your customer needs, and then focus on excelling at whatever your solution is. I think it's important to be a lifelong learner, especially today, right? So that's kind of one of the reasons I did the Cambridge CTO course. Right, it was December 23. I had that job, right? I didn't need to do it for my job. I did it because I was curious. I wanted to learn what's the latest thinking, what can I learn, but also to set an example for the folks that work for me. That continuously improving yourself is really important. And I think that's never been true today. I think folks could go through multiple careers. And when you have success, make sure your team's front and centre, right? And share that credit and give them that credit. Because it's, for me, that's how we become a force multiplier, right? You've got a finite period of time and you want your leadership. It can be an amplifier or an attenuator. And if I can build trust in relationships and a culture of discretionary effort, then my input time that I spend with folks, I can get a much bigger gain for the customers, for the organisation that I work for. So, but remember, with all the technology, it's about people. It's about customers. It's about people, your relationships. So that would be it. I don't know if that's what you expected, but you probably did for me.
Oh, it's outstanding. Ronnie, it was such a pleasure having you on the pod. Thank you for taking your time to chat with us today.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
I think we're going to have you back on for a part 2. So
Absolutely.
if you'll grace us again, that was truly wonderful.